It knows how to hunt. I know how to survive.
Hello, my name is Jos Corvus. I like to write and tell stories. I love to learn about storytelling, and I do that by breaking down the stories other people have made. As ever, we're only looking at stories from the point of view of learning. We're not trying to break down stories to put them down. There's no bias, there's no overhype or need to promote needlessly. There is just honest insight into story. Thoughts are all my own. I'm interested to hear yours. So, Prey 2022, the story premise. Naru's a native Indian girl who wants to be a hunter. She fails the rites of passage required to be a hunter and leaves the village to hone her skills. She wanders the forests and plains of 18th century America and comes across a predator which is itself working its way up the food chain. So is Prey any good? I thought Prey was excellent. It's different, that's for sure. It often feels like a fly-on-the-wall documentary drama, a beautifully framed character study tracking Naru's disassociation from her village life and her journey to be a hunter. There are a lot of positives. Probably the greatest achievement of Prey is that it held my attention from beginning to end. It was totally compelling while being only focused on this native Indian girl who would be the hunter. Naru's quiet and studious approach to every moment is captivating. She doesn't say much. The camera is on her for almost the entire movie, and it never gets old. Naru's running with quicksand, that final shot from above, is an all-time great movie moment for me. The second half reveal of the 18th century predator's tech and Naru's quiet observation was as compelling and 10 times the fun. Still on positives? To become a hunter, you have to kill something that's hunting you. Damn if that's not a great line. If that's not exactly what it is, then I think it's pretty close. The predator, primal and gnarly, excellently imagined. This predator felt like a bit like an orc, one of those sort of grunty predators that you'd send out at the front to take all the hits to find out the lay of the land. A positive and a negative. There's no A story, only the B story character study. This means there's very little emotional payoff or immersion from drama. When people die, that we don't have an emotional connection to this moment. However, the absence of an A story actually suits a Predator movie. This is, after all, a Predator movie. We're not here largely for the feels. Some negatives. I hunt because you tell me I can't. Now that feels like a writer making a point they read on Twitter over an 18th century Native American girl offering heartfelt insight into her motivations. I still don't know why Naru was angry with her brother for saving her and then killing the lion. I can understand she'd be angry with herself. There was even a moment when her brother was uncharacteristically mean to her. To justify that sensibility, I couldn't get my head around that. Another positive and negative. Through the second half, I kept asking myself if I believed Naru could kill the predator. I thought the movie did a great job of going for it. I believed it. But there were still moments in the story climax that came across as performance theatre over life and death. And I still haven't figured out how Naru managed to get the predator to actually shoot itself. Story elements. As I break down story elements and work out how story elements you were used to create the story, I'd usually deep dive into the story, but we don't actually have much of any story here. So there's no wider A story threat, there's only Naru's B story journey. So thinking about this, you might say, well, isn't the predator the A story threat? Well, actually, he is a threat, but he's not a story threat as much as he's not part of a wider story, because there isn't a wider story. Naru only becomes prey when she happens to be in the same part of the forest as the predator. There is no narrative that's driving them together. The fact there is no wider story actually works well, in my opinion. There is a natural flow to the narrative by focusing the camera on Naru and her journey. The predator never has worked well as an A-story threat because he doesn't want anything beyond hunting that would serve as an A story. think it's largely why Predator movies have previously struggled. The writers have tied themselves in knots trying to manufacture an A story around the Predator. Prey instead focuses on the B story and has Naru and the Predator cross paths. And like I say, I think it works. The stakes then. What does Naru care about enough to fight for? The entire story is built around Naru's passion to be a hunter. The stakes and threat then come from what prevent her from doing that. Now, it might be argued Naru is trying to overcome a cultural bias preventing her from hunting. There is a great visual of Naru leaving the village, walking against the tide of village women. Except the narrative, the actual narrative, portrays the village as tolerant as Naru's desire to hunt, if with raised eyebrows. At the end of Act 1, Naru seems to be battling her own sense of displacement over anyone specifically preventing her from hunting. So this is an internal journey, and that's certainly what the story presents us with. Now it has a few wobbles and we'll get to those. So Act 1, defining normal. So any story has to start by defining the location, the world arena or the arenas, the time frame and the characters. So this movie's opening gives us a familiar American landscape. It gives us a native Indian cultural setting. The visual depiction of the native Indians give us a timeline I imagine to be early 18th century. Naru is introduced as the central character. The story quickly stages the village's expectation or the role within the village that women perform against Naru's desire to hunt, and it does it very quickly and it does it very well. Naru's desire to hunt and not to do the normal woman's work is tolerated, and she is considered to be one of the best trackers within the community. So if something didn't change, then what would happen is Naru would wake up every morning, feel disconnected, and then go off and hunt, and that would repeat. So something's got to change to actually kick this story into place, and that's when we get the story change. So the story shifts us out of this normal state when a lion threatens and kills some of the villagers. This is the moment the movie's dramatic narrative is defined, and to become a hunter you have to kill something hunting you. It's also Naru's moment to prove herself as a hunter, but she fails and her brother rescues her and kills the lion, which then feeds into the inciting incident. Now the problem we have is that, as I've mentioned already, the story seems to be conflict, and you get an idea that they had a real struggle with this because they have this final scene which we'll get to, but nothing in the setup so far actually pays off that final scene. And I think in post-production what they tried to do is try and get a sense that her brother was the problem, and the brother was almost stealing this kill of the lion. And it didn't make sense, but that they inserted a scene making the brother uncharacteristically mean to her, and it didn't quite work, or at least was confusing. So my take on it was the fact that Naru was could not deal with the fact that she had failed, and she couldn't face the fact that she would have to spend a lifetime of picking berries rather than hunt. And so she left the village to fulfill her own internal destination, internal desire. Act 2, fun and games. So leading us to the midpoint, this sequence is the most captivating, I thought. You could almost call this the discovery journey, into the point where it purely focuses on Naru observing the world and evolving her hunting skills and the technology she uses to become effective at it. Her journey matches the beat of this young predator. I got the sense he was a young predator testing out a food chain across the plains. The lack of a wider story means that Naru has no objective other than her walkabout of self-discovery. The performance and documentary narrative works really hard, and I thought succeeds at making this whole sequence mesmerizing and holding our attention. So we get to the midpoint. So the midpoint is where starts to go down. So the predator unknowingly saves Naru from a crazed grizzly bear. The predator doesn't pose any threat to Naru, as she was the prey of the bear and not the hunter, but it establishes the two characters as being in the same space ahead of the second half of the story. So now we're into the bad guys. The midpoint pivots the story, and rather than just a walkabout now, we actually have the Predator and Naru in the same space, and we quickly step down to the All Is Lost. And these pivots, the All Is Lost, the Darkest Hour, are turning points that turn the screw. And we find here a team of braves has been sent by Naru's brother to find her. Of course, it makes sense that the village would be worried about her and want her back. And so they have been hunting her to take her back to the village. The trouble is, because they've been hunting her, they are now within the sights of the Predator, and we're now into the Predator doing its thing. The Braves, we feel bad about the Braves that we don't have a total emotional buy-in to their deaths, because that wider A story doesn't create that emotional buy-in, that common purpose. Darkest Hour, so we're turning the screws once more. So after the Predator kills all the Braves, Naru's escaped into a forest where she's immediately captured by French trappers. The Darkest Hour comes from the fact that she discovers that not only is she being captured, but her brother has been captured. They are now staked out as bait by the French trappers for the Predator. We now know the Predator well enough to know that the French trappers here are purely meat. It's a really well staged scene. You get an impression that maybe there was more to this. It looks like the French trappers had sort of scorched earth this whole place to prevent the Predator from running around and jumping around the trees, but they were underestimating the Predator. Great fun. But the Darkest Hour comes from the fact not only from the fact that Naru and her brother are staked out, but they also then somehow I don't quite remember how this worked, but they then became prey for the Predator, and her brother sacrifices himself to save Naru. This is the moment, Darkest Hour is the moment of total defeat, and we move into the resolution. Of course, what the resolution does is allows the character to collect themselves, to take everything they've learned through the story that's happened so far, and all the deaths of the Braves, of all the French trappers, have educated Naru, and now she's equipped to take on the Predator in the resolution. And the question we've been asking ourselves is now answered. Naru and the Predator face off, and largely the story does a great job of convincing us Naru would at least put up a good fight. There are multiple sleights of hand. The fight is a little theatrical in contrast to the realistic docu-style of the movie, but all in all, it worked pretty well. Opening and closing image. Okay, because there's no A story, there's nothing for Naru to accomplish within the story by dropping the Predator's head at the feet of the elders. It mirrors a scene from the end of the first act where her brother was celebrated for killing the lion, which benefited the village. But Naru's scene doesn't have that same context because the Predator was never a threat to the village. This moment comes across as Naru stating, "Look, I am a hunter, I accomplished my personal goal." To which you imagine the village would ask where all the Braves are, including her brother that they sent out to bring Naru safely back to the village. Then you expect them to look at the Predator and ask what the that is, considering it never threatened the village and they never saw it through the entire story. So, summary. Prey is a compelling movie experience. It succeeds where money and established talent have repeatedly failed. The magic formula here, I think, was not to overcomplicate the story, just to make it about the two characters. There are a couple of flaws in the setup and the conclusion, but still for me, I think it ranks as the second best Predator movie I've ever watched, behind the original Predator. Okay, I hope you found that informative. Let me know if you have any questions or want me to explain anything in more detail. I'd appreciate a like if you could. It's the only way YouTube will ever know I'm here. Always working to improve these videos and make them better. Thank you for watching. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.